Members, the question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
I call Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I welcome the Minister's opening remarks because, of course, I would absolutely agree that the process that we have undertaken as a parliament is a robust way to bring to this House any electoral law amendments which ultimately we would want cross-party consensus on. And of course, it's a little bit about face, this process, because thankfully driving the changes that we have are a report by the Select Committee which has already considered what might need to be changed. We've already had submissions around that. Out of that have come some recommendations. Those recommendations have been drafted into a bill, and that will then allow submissions again to come forward from the public. So it's a robust procedure, and I think that that's appreciated by all sides of the House. Having said that, what has been captured by this draft bill is by no means every element that was considered by the Select Committee, particularly by some members of the Select Committee, to be of great importance. And I want to touch on some of the missing elements from this bill because they feel equally important to us on this side of the House. Now, the first that I would mention simply falls under the heading of how do we make it easier for members of the public to participate in the act of voting in New Zealand. Now, we know, because we work in this area, that it is a two-stage process. It requires first accurate enrolment, preferably before the published roll, but certainly before election day itself. Now, that in itself has caused problems. 10% of the population, roughly 330,000 voters, and that has doubled in recent times, 330,000 people who are eligible to vote do not even undertake the act of enrolling. Now, some of that may be deliberate, Mr Speaker, a choice to opt out of the process, but some of it could simply be a lack of understanding around what's required in order to vote. Because many people could naturally assume that you vote by showing up to a polling booth and casting a vote. Now, we know that that's part of the problem because if you look at the number of people who did undertake enough effort at least to participate in the act of voting by going to a voting booth and either on polling day or beforehand casting a vote, but did so inaccurately. When I say inaccurately, either they didn't enrol or they put down inaccurate information or there was a difference between their special vote form and their enrolment form. Some administrative error meant that 27,000 people cast a vote that didn't count last election. Now, in some cases, that would be as many votes that would be cast in an entire electorate. 27,000 votes discounted because of an error. And that error might be that someone went and cast their vote thinking they were on the electoral roll but weren't. Now, we know there are ways to mitigate against that risk. Now, the first thing you could do is that if as a voter I go into a polling place and I go in there early to vote in the advanced voting period, it's not election day, but I go in early and they can't find me on the roll. Now I can take a risk and say, oh, I'm pretty sure I'm on the roll, I'm just going to cast a vote anyway. If I'm not, it won't count. What they could do then is give me a special vote form and an enrolment form, and I have to fill out the two. Now, if I fill out anything there and there's an inaccuracy between the two, or if I say I'm definitely on the roll and they just give me one, there is so much room for error. If we combine the two votes and set forms and said, if you are having to fill in a special vote form, let's make that count as an enrolment form. Let's just have the one, removes the risk. A simple administrative change that could change the outcome for thousands of voters who currently have had their vote not count. And they know it, because after the election they get sent an enrolment form that said you cast a vote and it didn't count, please can you enrol? Now that doesn't exactly encourage participating in democracy. The Electoral Commission came to us as a Select Committee and they said, we think we can do this. In fact, we think we should do this. Let's combine these two forms. I still don't understand why government members voted against that. I still don't understand that. And so I want the opportunity again at Select Committee for that to be discussed. Because I can absolutely guarantee now for this House Labor will be putting an SOP on that matter, and I would much prefer that we have consensus on this question. So it would be good if we could use this process to tease out why it is the government had discomfort with that change. Now, taking it one step further, we had one other element that the government had even less comfort with again, and that was you can enrol all the way through the advanced voting period, and in fact you can do it at a polling station. If I go in and I'm found not to be in the roll, I can fill in an enrolment form and I can vote at the same time. That is great, but there's one day you can't, and it's the day that most voters turn out to vote, and it's election day. It is becoming increasingly arbitrary to say that you cannot enrol on that day. Increasingly arbitrary. In fact, when we tested out at Select Committee why it was that we still had that partitioned off distinct day where you couldn't, it was identified that actually we can probably maintain the integrity of the voting system and allow enrolment on the day that you vote, on election day. So again, we had real concerns that we could potentially be turning away people who are willing and ready to vote because of that administrative quirk in our system. That seems completely unnecessary. We are very lucky in New Zealand that our voter fraud is low. The integrity in our system is high. It's from memory, I want to say 150 duplicate votes, and the Electoral Commission couldn't even narrow down how much of that is simply people, for instance, who aren't aware that when they've filled in a ballot paper, a special vote, for instance, in a residential facility, and then fill in a second. Actually, a lot of our incidents are probably, I didn't want to say senile, but we don't know. In some cases, it could simply be that. The numbers are so low that actually there will be cases of that. There will be. So why is it that we have a fear around opening up the ability to enrol and vote on the same day? I say to the Chair, I know he meant no offence by that statement, but we do go into every place where someone is eligible to ensure they have the opportunity to vote. So those are two issues we had great concerns of. And the other thing I do just want to add is that civic education, we discuss it every time. Let's actually do something about it this time. It should be compulsory in the senior years of students in our schools to not only enrol, but to learn about the electoral system and the political system in New Zealand. It's not enough that we do it in social studies. It's not enough that we do it in junior school when it doesn't feel as relevant to a young person. Why is this not embedded within our compulsory subjects in New Zealand? Not elective, not a choice that is made by a school, but every single student should be learning that. It is absolutely critical. I want to touch very briefly on what is included in the bill. The Minister did that a little bit too. Many of the changes, I would say, very broadly are captured by the idea of giving the Electoral Commission, where there should be flexibility, greater flexibility to write clear, plain English on voting forms, not ballots, because we've kept them distinct and legislated, but on guidance and other non-statutory forms to make sure that they have just the ability to ensure they're doing everything they can to make their processes accessible, that they don't just have to communicate via post. We've also done some really common sense things like allowing the Electoral Commission to use online electronic roll lookup in voting places, so we're not just reliant on the printed roll, but we'll have real-time data on enrolment, so the 6 weeks prior to the election, if someone's enrolled, they will have that real-time information if it's available. That's important. Because now of such an increase in advanced voting, we had a discussion around where should electioneering not take place around an advanced polling place. And roughly we thought, well, look, people should not be harassed. They should be free to walk into a polling place without being harassed, without being confronted. So creating a 10-metre boundary around polling places is important, but accepting that, for instance, in inner city polling booths, like in the area that I work across, there are hoardings sometimes in quite close proximity. There always have been. That's because we have more polling places in accessible areas. So let's not be extreme, let's be practical and give a bit of flexibility for the Electoral Commission to reduce that if it's impractical for a voting place, that particular boundary. We're Saturdaysing when hoardings can go up. That's been a bugbear for a while. We're saying, look, an MP signage on the office is obviously not an election advertisement. Let's be clear about that. We're trying to be practical and pragmatic, but I would challenge the committee. We need to make sure we are doing everything in our power, within reason, to make sure voting and enrolment is accessible, and we haven't quite got there yet.